Welcome to Binge Watchers, where we talk about the stories and characters we love in the shows they live in. My name is Ron. Let's talk about Season 1 of Troy, Fall of a City. Before we get to the review, I just want to mention that you can now support Binge Watchers on Patreon. I'll make a separate video about why I chose to put Binge Watchers on Patreon and what it means for the channel, but yeah, just wanted to put it out there. So I'm not totally sure why they made this show or what they were going for exactly. It's not that it's bad, it's just the kind of thing that you watch and can't help but wonder why this is the thing that they chose to do. Troy, Fall of a City tells the story of the siege of Troy from Greek mythology. It's the story of the Illiad, one of the greatest epic poems from which we draw a lot of what we know about the Greek myth. You're probably familiar with the story, but in broad strokes, Paris, a prince of Troy, and the Spartan queen Helen fall in love, and Helen escapes from Sparta and returns to Troy with Paris. The king of Sparta, Menelaus, isn't too happy about all of this, so along with his brother Agamemnon, they build this giant coalition of all the Greek kings and lay siege on Troy, starting the Trojan War, with the main objective being getting Helen back. It's one of the most retold, most famous, most epic stories ever written. It has inspired countless pieces of art, so I'm not surprised that it was finally adapted into a show. I'm just surprised by the way that it was done. Take, for example, a story like The Three Musketeers. There are a ton of movies and TV shows retelling that story, same characters, same setting, but they don't usually feel the same because one maybe takes a more realistic approach and another goes for crazy action scenes and another retelling tells the whole thing from the perspective of another character or something. Creators find a way to put their own spin on it. They take these stories that obviously have proven to be awesome and amazing because they get retold for hundreds of years and find new ways of telling them. Even Sons of Anarchy is loosely based on Hamlet. My point is that there's nothing wrong with the retelling of an old story. So while I was watching Fall of a City, I couldn't help but compare it to the previous retelling of this story, the 2004 movie Troy with Brad Pitt and Orlando Bloom, which I thought was an entertaining movie, and you would think that Fall of a City would do something to differentiate from it a little bit, right? Because otherwise, why make the show? Why not make some other sword and sandal epic? And it's not like I thought Troy was the best movie ever, but there were a lot of scenes in Fall of a City where I was like, yeah, I've seen that exact scene before done the exact same way, just better. And that was my main issue with the show. There wasn't anything to make it unique. It's all very competently made. The show looks okay. It follows pretty much the same story as you would expect. The performances kind of reminded me of Marco Polo, that other Netflix show, with the similarity being that the older actors were pretty great, but the young leads were not great. I was actually surprised to learn that this was written by David Farr, who also wrote the screenplay for The Night Manager, which is an absolutely incredible show, because some of the dialogue here paired with the, let's call it, stiff performance by Paris and Helen, it produces some pretty weird moments. Fall of a City does almost take a fresh spin on the story, because in this version, the gods are actually characters. The gods exist. They're not implied. You see them, and it's awesome. There's a really cool moment in this show where they have to make a sacrifice to Artemis to change the direction of the wind so they could set sail. And the second the sacrifice is made, you see the winds change direction. And that was a really nice touch. Seeing the gods observe the war and influence it, that could have been a unique thing here. That could have been the angle. But the show barely explores that. You see it here and there almost as if like to tease a cool thing that might have been. As I mentioned, the show looks okay, but I'm guessing they didn't have the budget to make it look as impressive as a Brad Pitt movie, which is fine, but in a few instances it undercuts the story. When they talk about Troy as this massive city with huge walls that can never fall, and then when they get to the walls of the city and they look like it's maybe 2 flights of stairs, you can't really take that moment seriously. And because they chose to play those scenes exactly like they did in the movie, it just kind of feels silly, I guess. And I do get that whatever that scene is, that is the scene from the epic. Like, Achilles stands outside the city walls and yells for Hector. It's not an original scene from the movie. I'm just saying that Fall of a City could have maybe found a way to do things differently, knowing that it can't really get the same result with visual effects and sets. There are some good-looking battle scenes in the show, but Fall of a City doesn't really focus on the spectacle, which was probably a safe bet. Most of the big battle scenes do this thing where you see the start of the battle and then the story skips to the aftermath, but there are some really cool one-on-one sword fights, which again are note for note done in the same way they were done in the movie, but most of the focus in the story is more on the love story between Paris and Helen, the politics, the relationships. Some reviews out there went as far as to call it soapy. I didn't think so, but since the writing and performances didn't really work for me, whenever the show slows down for all of that stuff, it also became boring, and I do not use that word lightly, but there are about 3.5 episodes in the middle of this 8-episode season where you're probably going to be on your phone a lot. The controversy, or the thing that review websites are using for clickbait about this show, is the fact that the mythical characters of Achilles and Zeus and a few other characters are played by black actors.
Fictional characters. Am I getting through to you at all?
Which I think is an insane thing to be upset about on several different levels. But you know, this show is not good enough to warrant an invitation for a toxic comment section, which I understand might happen anyway, so I'm not gonna get into it. So, bottom line, should you watch it? I'm gonna go ahead and say that no, not really, unless you're a huge fan of the story or you're all about this type and genre of shows. It is a very competently made show. I didn't think that any part of it was bad or very good. It just felt incredibly mediocre. Maybe if it wasn't a complete retread of the previous retelling of the same story, I would have liked it more, but honestly, I just say go and watch the Brad Pitt movie. It's like 3.5 hours long, which is almost half as long as this entire show, and it does beat for beat the same things, just better, which is so weird. Why did they choose to do it this way? And there are like a bunch of iconic scenes, like when Achilles gets shot in the heel with an arrow. There are supposed to be these big emotional moments, or at least special. And for some reason, those are the moments where Fall of a City chooses to be like, nah. I feel like I'm really shitting on this show. It's not bad. It's just so average that it makes you wonder why they didn't go with an original story that they could maybe adjust and adapt. I obviously don't know anything about TV show budgeting, but according to a bunch of sources, this was the most expensive BBC production ever. It was a joint production between the BBC and Netflix. They built huge sets for it, but I swear it doesn't look as good as Vikings, for example, which had a far smaller budget in the first seasons. Same goes for The Last Kingdom. These are shows that they knew that they can't pull off the massive spectacle of something like Game of Thrones, which has like infinite money, so they made it work in other ways. They went in more of like a in the trenches approach, where it feels like both Troy, Fall of a City, and Marco Polo, which came before it, kind of overreached and ended up just not looking great. What about you? Have you watched this show? What did you think about it? Do you think I'm kind of overreacting with the similarities between it and the movie and they should be just considered completely separate? Let me know in the comments down below. And also let me know, what's your favorite kind of epic sword and sandal show? I really like that term, sword and sandal. If you're going to be talking about spoilers, please use spoiler tags in your comments. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And you can find me on Twitter and TV Time and Instagram. You can also join our Discord server where we chat about TV and it's a lot of fun. You can also support binge watchers on Patreon, which is a thing now. But if you're finding binge watchers for the first time, welcome. I'd like to invite you to join the binge watchers community. Come talk about TV with us. It's a lot of fun. Subscribe to the channel. And in any case, keep binging, and I will see you on the battlefield.